The Arizona sun had only begun to burn the horizon into gold and blood when Colton Reeves, a trail-worn cowboy with calloused hands and a heart patched up by solitude, reined in his horse atop a ridge overlooking the narrow valley road below, where a broken wagon leaned to one side, like an injured beast, refusing to take another step. Beside it stood an Apache woman, tall, proud, and still as carved obsidian, her long black hair drifting with the slow morning wind while her dark eyes followed every rustle of brush as though danger lived behind each shadow. Colton's horse snorted, breaking the silence, and the woman's hand slipped to the knife at her hip, not out of panic, but with the steady instinct of someone who had lived too close to violence for too many years. Colton raised his hands in peace, easing his horse closer, saying in a low voice worn smooth by trail dust, "Ma'am, looks like your wagon's had a rough morning." She didn't answer at first, only studied him with a gaze sharp enough to slice through lies, and he could see what she was thinking. White cowboy, alone, armed, approaching her territory. She had every reason to mistrust him, but Colton had lived long enough to know when someone needed help, even if they'd rather bite off their own tongue than admit it. Finally, she spoke, her English careful and precise. "Wheel broke. Mule cannot pull it." Her tone carried both strength and exhaustion, the kind born from fighting the land as much as the people on it. Colton dismounted slowly, keeping his palms visible. "I can fix it," he offered, "if you'll allow it." Her eyes narrowed, but after a long breath, she stepped aside. That one gesture, so small, yet so heavy, told him he'd been granted a sliver of trust, the kind that could vanish if he so much as breathed wrong. He crouched beside the snapped spokes, examining the damage. One good hit from a hidden rock had shattered the wheel clean through. As he searched his saddlebags for tools, he asked gently, "What's your name?" She hesitated, suspicion flashing again before she answered. "Nayeli," a soft name for someone who carried storms in her eyes. He nodded. "Colton Reeves," he said, though he doubted she cared much who he was. Using a strip of rawhide, he bound the broken spokes, reinforced the frame with a piece of scavenged hardwood he split from a dead branch, then hammered it together with a flat stone. Sweat trickled down his temples, but he didn't stop until the wheel held firm. When he stood, dusting his hands off, Nayeli watched him with a mixture of caution and curiosity, her expression unreadable but her shoulders no longer as rigid. "Why help me?" she asked suddenly, and her voice carried something deeper than suspicion, something like confusion, even frustration. Colton shrugged lightly. "Because you needed help. Out here, the desert don't care who you are. It'll swallow anyone whole." For a moment, her eyes softened like she might say more, but then the wind shifted, carrying with it a strange tension, and her gaze darted toward the distant mountains as though some invisible danger lurked there. She murmured a quiet, "Thank you," barely audible, then climbed into her wagon, guiding the mule forward. Colton watched her roll away, noticing the stiffness in her posture, the way she glanced behind her as if expecting riders to appear. Something was wrong. He felt it in the way the birds suddenly hushed, in the way the air trembled with an unspoken warning. But he forced himself to ride on, toward his cabin near Dead Man's Wash, telling himself it wasn't his business. But as he sat by his fire that night, the sky glowing with dying embers of sunset, he found his thoughts drifting back to Nayeli, the fear she tried to bury, the tension in her voice, the way her hands shook only once before she hid them under her shawl. By morning, the entire world felt off-kilter. The desert was too quiet. No birds, no insects, no breeze, just a heavy stillness pressing against the cabin walls. Colton stepped outside, rubbing sleep from his eyes, when a distant tremor rippled through the ground, soft at first, then growing the unmistakable rhythm of many hooves. Before he could reach for his rifle, the tree line erupted as a dozen Apache riders burst into the clearing, faces painted in streaks of red, white, and black, riding in a wide circle around his cabin like spirits of war risen from the earth itself. Dust spiraled around them as their horses snorted and pawed the ground, surrounding him completely. Colton froze, hands lifted slightly, his voice gritty as he muttered, "Easy there!" But the riders ignored his words. tightening their ring until he could see the sharp glint of arrowheads, aimed directly at his throat. And at the front of them, eyes colder, harder, burning like coals under storm clouds, sat a man who bore the same high cheekbones, same raven black hair, and same gaze as Nayeli. The war chief stared down at Colton with an expression carved from pure judgment and thunder, and when he finally spoke, his voice rolled across the clearing like a storm breaking open.